streetscape. And I always love taking it kind of down here because the buildings are always beautifully illuminated, and the contrast with the night sky, I think, is just fabulous. And Stonegate is a kind of a combination of some really kind of fine buildings that don't necessarily reference one another, but just fit together beautifully. So you can see on this one, we've got covered in ceramic tiles, which is very original. There's no others in the streets quite like it. It sits next to plain buildings on this side and on this side. So you've kind of got a hodgepodge. You've got a sort of delightful melding of buildings which are of a similar age and pedigree, but that are uniquely different and individual. So it makes for a very, very satisfying, I think, stroll down. Organic, absolutely, completely. What a great way of describing it, KCM. That's exactly what it is. It's an organic approach. And largely because so many of these buildings have been knocked around, have been altered. So even buildings all these buildings down here are medieval in construction, but many of them will have sort of Victorian or even 20th century ground floor kind of fit outs. Mostly it's Victorian or even Georgian, tell by the bowed glass windows, to create retail spaces at kind of ground level. But other than that, it's always a case of look upwards. So even though this is quite clearly I would say an early Victorian ground floor, as you go upwards, distinctly, of course, you see sort of Georgian building above. So in this case, the original medieval building's been taken out and replaced by Georgian, but right next door, and you can see by how it sits outwards, we've got medieval. So a very, very unusual window there, if you look. Sort of, it's hanging over one building, sort of belongs to the next. More chocolate, I'm afraid, hotel chocolate, very expensive. Very good, apparently, but beyond my price range is hotel chocolate. So, but again, Mother's Day is now very much the focus of the kind of retail offer. But we come over because those frequent flyers on my tours will know we're about to arrive at one of my favourite buildings in the city, Mulberry's, which is the building coming on the right-hand side now, or the middle of your picture. Originally built for priests, lodgings for priests of the Minster. It became a private home and became Mulberry Hall. And it is, I think, in a street in a city of incredibly fine buildings, this is one of the best. It is now Café Wolferhardt, a German Christmas shop, but it is just a building that I think just delights. Every time we kind of come down here, I can kind of feel an inward cooing and gasping for myself, let alone for you guys. It is just sort of picture perfect. That shop's expensive too. Well, I think, it's York. We're in the centre of it. We're in a very kind of desirable part of it. So it is going to be expensive. I think, that it's not necessarily something you'd throw at it and go, oh, it's expensive. I mean, yes, of course it's expensive because it's York and because we're on kind of Stonegate. So, of course, you can order online. You don't need to obviously be here to get these things. They may well be cheaper, of course. Well, more than Christmas looking, it's a Christmas shop. Amory, so they are saying Fabergé egg-style decorations, if that is your thing. Yeah, absolutely, Marianne, timber framed. And if you look, if we just kind of pull backwards, this building dates from the 1430s. If this had been built probably 30 or 40 years later, it wouldn't have had anything like this amount of timber on show, because it was right at the end of the period where English timber, English oak, was widely available for house building. Going further forward, most of the big oak trees had been cut down, and the shipbuilders were very much having sort of first dibs, if you like, on the tree trunks. So consequently, less and less wood became available, and this is where brick starts to come in. But here in 1434 at Mulberry Hall, it's the last great kind of hurrah of the timber building, where if you had the resources, you have as much timber as you wanted, and so we get this incredibly beautiful construction that absolutely kind of beguiles us, I think. But let me come around this side, and I'll give you a sort of shot along. What a building that is. So it's a Christmas place, although on this side we've got Easter things. So we've got Peter Rabbit here, Beatrix Potter. I think it's Peter Rabbit anyway. Which of course is signifying Easter. So they seem to have their eye on a sort of 12-month trade here. So they're moving from Christmas to Easter. So good for them. You've got to diversify a bit, haven't you, to do money. The famous sign of the Old Star Inn. Absolutely Easter Rabbit, Laura. It's the famous sign of the Star Inn. This sign was put here in the 1740s when this street was reorientated. And they built a load of new shop fronts on, because originally the houses of this street were further back. They were sort of down the alleyways. So if we just come in and remind you what Barley Hall looks like, which is just down here, this was so typical of how the houses were sort of constructed, which was away from the main streets, because the streets, sorry, another signal's dropped, but it should come back in a minute. The streets were noisy, they were smelly, they were disease-ridden, for peasants and so forth. So if you had the money and the wherewithal, much nicer to be a few metres away from the street. So Barley Hall is a great example of that, at the Great Alley Dawn. And so basically what you do is you sort of pay to be withdrawn somewhat. So this is kind of Barley Hall, originally built for the Bishop of Wakefield, then it's Sir William Snorshall, who lived here for kind of many years as city mayor. But the front of these would have then been set out for commercial renting. So you'd have, if you like, a residential property at the rear, and on the front side you would have areas going to shop for commercial activity. So when the new street of Stonegate was kind of laid out and reorientated in the early part of the 18th century, the Star Inn pub disappeared. And so they managed to get permission from the council to put this sign up so people could still find the pub. Is it haunted? Yes, definitely. It's all haunted around here. This is the most haunted street in the city. And the Star is the most haunted, or one of those haunted pubs. So if I just kind of take you down, I don't know if it follows people, but everywhere you go down here is you see it's down an alleyway to get to it. And so this is the difference between the contemporary sort of shop front, if you like, street, and the historic element of it. So yes, absolutely, it's a ghost central around here. If you go on my ghost tour, I've certainly got one on Halloween, probably do it before that then as well. I'll be down here, many of the properties down here have got stories to tell. So particularly 35 Stonegate in front of us, and a number of properties in this area. But let's walk on. So these buildings here that we're looking at on your left-hand side, this is the oldest part of Stonegate. These date from 1340 to 1360 in construction. And thank you, Jane, giving me a follow. And they are the oldest sort of continuous row here on Stonegate. And it's believed the name Stonegate was named by Anglo-Saxons who occupied the city, thank you, Lena, after the Romans left. So Romans constructed the city. A great fortress was in a place of where the Minster is today. And so to bring the stone from the river, which is at the end of here behind the mansion house, so right down about 200 metres or so from where we are now, to where the fortress, the basilica, the centre part of the fortress was built just down here, they needed a solid surface to move the stones. You had to roll the tree trunks to carry the stones. So this was Stonegate. So that was, we think this is named by Anglo-Saxons coming in and describing it, Stone Street. So it already existed when they arrived. So we think this is the oldest sort of paved street in the city. There's a bit more of the Minster that's illuminated up here. So this was all very highly illuminated. The other week when we came down here, if you came down when York was showing its big illuminations, that was all here on the south transept of the Minster. So it's nice to see some of this is lit up, so I'll take you down here. Love this part. It's called Minster Gate. So this site here, Minster Gates, was one of the 4 gateways. So if I kind of just pan back a little bit, and you can just sort of see sort of a narrow alley in front of us, there'd have been a gateway, an archway and a gate over there controlling access to the Minster precinct. Because obviously the Minster precinct was full of valuables, of goodies, of kind of gold and silver and artworks and coins. So constantly you wouldn't just allow anybody to wander in off the street. You control the access. So this is called Minster Gates. Kathy, the Minster entrance fee, I believe, and somebody might check it, I believe it's about £12, £14. But if you're going to a church service, it is completely free. So if you're visiting York, what I would say and recommend wholeheartedly is go to a service, even if you're not somebody who has a sort of strongly defined faith. I think you'll find it a very uplifting experience. And you're seeing the building in the way that it was intended. Evensong would be my recommendation, which is sung mass. Usually happens about sort of tea time each day. And it was free in 2000. Yeah, well, obviously what's happened sort of subsequently is the cost. You can have a look over here. All these lights are part of the renovation work going on, and it costs literally millions a year to run. So I think we just need to accept that that has to be paid for from somewhere, and part of that now is from fees. But as I say, for those that want to visit to take part in a piece of Christian fellowship, that is completely free, which is what it should be. So it's only for those that are quite happy to say, we're just here to look at the history, the architecture. Then, like paying to get in a museum, I don't think any of us can really seriously say that is remiss, if it means that we can keep and maintain this for generations to come. At the end of the day, large parts of this building are now getting on for 800 years old. So consequently, of course, the upkeep required is substantial. So I think we just have to accept that goes hand in hand. To say, for those who want to come for Christian worship, they can come in for nothing, and that will continue going forward. But for those who just want to visit and check it out, and I strongly recommend you do so, I think it's well worth the fee. I will get the early morning service. There'll be 12, 15 people in the whole cathedral. Yeah, well, of course, there'll be services going on throughout the day. But I say, even so, I think is the nicest, particularly for those who haven't got faith, because it's probably most what you'd expect a cathedral service to be like. You've got a choir, obviously, and of course these places were built for sound, for music. There's a great east window, largest expanse of medieval stained glass anywhere in the world. Tremendous undertaking, put in place between 1405 and 1408. It's lovely to see it illuminated on a night. Let me just sort of move backwards. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll come over here and then we'll spin it round and you can take a vertical shot, because I know you like your vertical postcards from time to time. But let me get into a good position to get the whole of that window in for you. And hopefully you'll be able to do that. So I'm just about to spin the camera around. This allows people to climb the spiral staircase to the building. Yes, Nancy, it's part of the entrance. I think you have to pay a little bit extra to go up there. So I'm going to spin the camera. So close your eyes to get the motion sickness. And there we are. The great east window of York Minster, the largest medieval stained glass window in the world. So how's that? So let's spin that back around. We've got College Street in front of us here. So we've got St William's College, and the beautiful building of the city. We are rather spoilt with the sheer number of fantastic buildings we have at our disposal here in the city. Show you this is St William sat on his throne. Above there you've got his crest there, the gold shield with the 7 chevrons. On his right hand side you've got the cross keys of St Peter. St Peter, of course, being the principal apostle, and he has the keys of heaven. And if in case you're wondering why that's here, it is because the Minster is, let's go around this way, the Cathedral of St Peter at York. So Minster is a bit of a nickname, really. It means meeting place of pilgrims. There's lots of Minsters. Westminster, of course, in London, being the most famous, all of them. But it is the metropolitical Cathedral of St Peter at York, is its proper name. But very few people use that term, including the Minster themselves. So consequently, it's known to one and all as the Minster. But if you'll say, why is it a Minster and not a cathedral? It is a cathedral. That is simply its given name, its nickname, its familiar term, if you like, that people sort of give it. So hope that clears up any confusion. It's often a question that visitors to York say, well, how can you go a Minster and not a cathedral? They are one and the same thing. So let me just cross over and not get run over. That would be fantastic. And we will continue onwards, going down Goodrham Gate now. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to be in. Oh, Joyce, so good you did it 4 times. I guess you didn't. I've also got a bit of a thing going on with my chat. I saw you comment 4 times. So hopefully that won't continue. But it is lovely, isn't it? And this is, again, Gudrum Gate, comprised of some lovely buildings and some right old dogs. Don't worry about it. It just happens to be it's the app, isn't it? It just has slight oddities. But again, what's nice about York for those that haven't visited in person, firstly, is how close everything is. So you haven't got to, once you're in the historic core, the centre, Wells Cathedral, yeah, lovely. What you don't have to do is kind of drive anywhere. Everybody's kind of very, very kind of concentrated, very, very kind of close together. So that's great. But also, as you'll notice if I pan the streets, it's all pretty level as well. So even if you are kind of coming in and your mobility isn't what it was, you might need a mobility aid. You're not going to struggle here in York. For the most part, it is very, very accessible for people with mobility issues, and it's very, very easy to hire and get hold of kind of scooters and so forth. Okay, Felicity. Well, hopefully we'll see you again very, very soon. When I was there, I saw the printer's shop, Printer's Devil outside. Yeah, we've missed that. We did shoot down past it, but we went quickly because there's a tour group there. And part of working the streets in the nicest possible sense is extending courtesy to fellow professionals. And so if there's somebody there that has got a group, I'm not going to stand there and talk to you and talk over them and get away with their enjoyment. So that's kind of why we didn't dwell on the Printer's Devil this time. But tune in next time and we will do the Printer's Devil. This is the oldest row of housing here in York. Our Lady's Row, save us, not like that nothing. Dates from 1316, this row of houses. So, we're talking about buildings that are 700 years old. And, of course, again, require great deal of upkeep, but we're nearly into King's Square in the Shambles. So we're on Gudrum Gate, named after Guthrum, a very, very important 9th century Viking king. And the Vikings came and took York by force in the year of 866. Any fans of the Vikings TV show who are tuned in, be thrilled to know that 3 sons of Ragnar Lothbrok came and took the city. Halfdan, Ubba and Iber the Boneless took York in 866, and they took their revenge on King Aella for the killing of their father Ragnar Lothbrok. So from that point onwards, from 866 onwards, this became the city of Jorvik, the great northern stronghold of the Viking Empire. And its capital is here at York, or Jorvik. And so Gudrum, or Guthrum, who was who was the Viking king, negotiated a peace settlement with King Alfred the Great to control half of the landmass of England, called the Danelaw, under control of the Vikings, under Viking laws, Viking taxes, Viking leadership. And so we've just come down his street. We're in King's Square now. So in front of us is the location of where the Viking palace was, in the centre of the Viking city of Jorvik, which now sits at the top of the Shambles. So I'm glad you've enjoyed that, Linda, from Maryland. So to hop off for the rest of you. We're nearly at the end of the tour. Just going to show us the Shambles before I let you go off to wherever else you need to be. So Shambles, of course, famous medieval street in York. Many of you will have experienced already on my tours, or otherwise you may have been or seen. They have a life of their own, the Shambles, as you might say. Not least now because of the association with Harry Potter, kind of inspiration, the film setting, of course, and just creates this sense of people go a little bit weak at the knees when it comes to the Shambles. It's lovely to come down here on an evening when it is far less populated. You come in the daytime, it can be incredibly busy. I can see right at the bottom there's a group doing a ghost tour, so I'm not going to get in their way. We'll finish up on the Shambles. What a nice way to finish up our hour together. Joyce, I'm glad you enjoyed the postcards. And what the Shambles, of course, is famous for is how narrow the streets are. And this bit that's coming into the centre of your picture now was that everyone falls in love with the Shambles, Dawn. I mean, we haven't got the wherewithal to stop that, because it's like something out of a pantomime, isn't it? It's like something out of a fairy tale. This is the kind of the old England that we all kind of dream of and kind of romantically associate it with, right? But right in the centre here, the oldest part, dating right into the early parts of the 14th century, show how kind of crazy narrow this street is. And the reason for that is because it was built for butchers. Diane, you're very welcome. And this was a meat market. But of course, at that time, there was no fridges or freezers. There was no way to preserve meat, really. So you had to eat it quickly. You could salt it, of course. You could dry it. But in terms of fresh meat, your window of consumption was pretty narrow. So consequently, what they did was they built the houses crazy close together. They ran canopies across the streets. So consequently, it was dark, it was cool, it was like being in a cellar. And that then gave you a bit extra time, a few days extra to keep the meat before it kind of go off for it needs salting or cooking or drying, whatever you need to do. And so these units were all butcher shops. These are called flesh shambles, again an Anglo-Saxon term, meaning literally flesh shelf. So we've got the area where the meat was kind of laid out. If I can spin you around and look upwards, what the light's like, you should be able to see meat hooks in the timbers there. And this continued on as a butcher's unit right all the way up into the Victorian era. So if I go down a couple of units from here, the Whitby Jet Shop, you'll be able to see illuminated here a little bit better. You've got the metal up here, so more akin to a modern butcher shop. You can see there where the meat was strewn across. So consequently, this was a place that was as charming as it is now, and a place where everybody is sort of drawn to in York. In its heyday, this would have been a place of blood and guts, a place of slaughter, a place of danger. You know, this was a place to send your servants. It isn't a place you come today. So it's somewhat ironic. I'll just spin this around for our last kind of shot of the Shambles. That it has become, if you like, this most picturesque place that we're all drawn to today. Its past couldn't be more different. But of course, it's now got this association with Harry Potter. And so everywhere we look, we see these associations from the potions cauldron to little doors for little elves down at number 10. The Shambles is 9 3/4 Shambles from Harry Potter. We've got number 10, the Shambles. Set back in time, absolutely. Well, quite a lot of steps back, actually. But this is a scene that has just inspired people. They fall for it. There's something fairy doors, absolutely, Maria. There's just something of magic about this place, and it never loses its power. It never diminishes. Even today, having visited this countless times, you can't fail to be enraptured by it. You can't fail to be just kind of brought into it. Not in a great way otherworldly. It's not of our time. It's a living connection to a different era, to a different time, to centuries back, where I'm sure many of you will have roots, if not in England, in Europe, before they headed across to North America, would have recognised streets like this. They would have walked up and down, that have worked, that have bought and sold in streets like this. So it's part of our story. If we feel drawn to it, it's perhaps because it is so redolent of where we've come from. And it's this quite literal living connection with our ancestors, with our past. And so vividly brought to life here in York, a place of extraordinary kind of architectural riches. So thank you so much. It is, Patty, we are absolutely spoilt for choice. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just go down and see one last thing before we kind of wrap on the tour. The Ghost Group has now moved on. As I say, it's courtesy. I think it's just bad manners to stand next to a ghost tour and do my thing. I don't like that. So if at times you wonder why I move from place to place, it's because I'm just extending the courtesy, that hope that others would do for us as well. We just ensure that we can all make a living on the streets of York, and we can all take our time with it, showing people in person or digitally what a magical place this is without kind of disturbance. So everyone goes back and says, one awesome time out in York, and not actually the tour guys are all fighting each other for the best shot, because that doesn't really help anybody, does it? So that's what we do. We try and work together, and I think that creates a better environment for everyone. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That's lovely. Absolutely, the stories these walls could tell, Monique, isn't it? You know, it's just so many people over the years, you know, not necessarily famous people, or people do anything, especially interesting, probably lots of ordinary stories. But it's that collection, isn't it, of one after another after another. of people living and working that just creates these cities. Why is the city of ghosts? It's the city of the dead. That there are far more people under the streets of the city than live here now. With 2,000 years plus of settlement, it's no wonder that we find stories, ghost stories, this rich tapestry of history that kind of comes together to form York of both a place but also a kind of city of the imagination. And York kind of exists on two kind of places. On the one hand, it's a modern contemporary city. We'll live and work, have to get around and drive and do all the kind of things we need to do, shop and pay our bills. But also it's this place of historical importance, a holiday centre. So it kind of exists on two planes simultaneously, and managing, I think, the tension between the two is not always easy. It's not always sort of ideal, as you might say. There is always a bit of a bloody tourists kind of thing going on. But often I think we manage to find and strike the balance so that it is a place where you can live, where you can flourish, educate your children, earn money, live well. But also it's a place where people can come and dream and just reconnect to an idea of a world that has largely kind of disappeared in most countries. It's kind of been, whether it's because of war or modernity, industrial revolution. York is a glimpse of what would have happened if the industrial revolution hadn't happened, and we lived in places that reminded us of the townscapes of the fairy tale illustrators. It's a different world, but it's very romantic. I think it pulls at our heartstrings, and so I'm delighted as ever to bring you to York